Good evening, everyone. So, welcome to the discussion for theme 4 of the PYQ series for anthropology. The theme for today is human evolution. Now, what are the cardinal points which we have to keep in mind before we start talking about the questions which have been appearing from this particular unit? Is that this is a highly static unit, and we can expect static questions, high yielding in terms of marks, questions which are asked from this particular area. The question format in this area is going to range from theories of evolution to understanding how human evolution itself happened, what were the drawbacks of different theories, and how eventually it all led to the modern synthetic theory of evolution. As a corollary of these questions, you can also see that this particular unit can also be linked with units of human genetics from unit 9. Right? So these are all interlinked. Okay. Now, if you look at the kind of questions which have been asked from this unit. So the first question has been repeated twice in your mains examination. What is Lamarckism as an ideology? What are the postulates? And what are its criticisms? So as we were talking about a series of theories being in place before eventually humanity landed on the modern synthetic theory of evolution, Lamarck happened to be one of the initial most scientists or scholar who propoundedly gave a theory which tried to explain human evolution through its own logic. So though the theory is not foolproof, you all know that it is not true entirely, and there were a lot of criticisms which were meted out to this theory. But even so, we study it even today because it happened to be one of the beginnings of the theorizing of the concept of human evolution in evolutionary biology. So how will you begin answers on these kind of questions? So firstly, you have to define what is Lamarckism. So the theory called Lamarckism is, like I told you, the oldest theory on human evolution, was given by him in his book Philosophie Zoologique in the year 1809. There were certain principles or certain postulates around which this theory was based upon. Like the first one was the idea of élan vital. These are all French terms because the scholar was French. The term élan vital means inner urge, which says that for evolution to begin, for evolution to happen, firstly there has to be certain inner urge within the organism. Now this inner urge or internal forces of life are what are going to lead to an increase in the size of organism and then eventually form organs and organ systems. So the first important step is that every organism should have an inner urge to grow outwards. Only then the growth is going to happen. The second postulate is environmental pressure and spontaneous formation of organs. Now what do you understand by this? Only inner urge is not enough to create a new characteristic out of your body. Along with the inner urge or the need or want which is present inside you, there also has to be an environmental pressure. Now this environmental pressure coupled with the internal urge in an organism is going to give rise to new organs. And this process is called spontaneous acquisition of new characteristics. Because when the organism presents an internal urge and the environment is supporting it, therefore there will be spontaneous acquisition of certain new characteristic features within the organism. The third step would be theory of use and disuse of organs. What does this theory say? For example, if an organism ends up developing an organ, but there is no mandate that that particular organ is going to stay permanently with the organism, because the development of an organ is directly proportional to its use. Meaning, if the organ is continuously in use, it will get strengthened. And if it is not used, it will get lost. Right? So the third step is saying that the development of organ is directly proportional to the quantum of usage. For example, the biceps of blacksmith are very huge, are very strong because they are used on a daily basis. The leg bones in horses are very strong because they are extensively used. And similarly, the neck of giraffe is very long because the giraffe aimed reaching higher reaches of the trees or higher branches of the trees to make sure that they could collect their food, right? On the other hand, if you take the example of snake, so as per Lamarckist idea, loss of limbs in snake is considered to be a factor or a byproduct of the snake not being able to use its limbs enough. So eventually they got lost. The fourth point is theory of inheritance of acquired characters, meaning as a product of inner urge, environmental pressure, use and continuous use of organs which have been newly developed, eventually there is going to be a facet that these organs which you have developed or these characteristic features which you have developed are going to travel to the next generation. Therefore, Lamarck's idea is saying that any kind of characteristics which are adopted by an organism in its lifetime by this process, depending on whether they are using the organs or not, they would be taken forward to the next generation, right? So this is called as theory of inheritance of acquired characters, that whatever characters have been acquired by the organism during its lifetime are going to get sent to the next generation, right? So inheritance happens over here. Now this is the postulates. There were certain criticisms which were meted out to this particular idea, because if you look around, we see different cultures have different kind of practices which kind of interferes with how certain characteristic features can be modified in different organisms. For example, the practice of iron binding of feet in women is very common in China, because it is believed that small feet are lucky for women in China. Therefore, they are given iron shoes to wear so that the feet remains small and proportionately it will be considered to be lucky. But we still do not have evidences of women being born in the next generation having smaller feet. That does not happen. So therefore here, the acquired characteristics are not getting transformed to the next generation, not getting inherited. So theory of inheritance of acquired characters was not working here. The second widespread example is August Weismann's mutilation experiment, where he kept rats on a rotating table and he mutilated the tails of the rats in the entire first generation. And then he interbred them to see if the other generation, the next generation, would be tailless, but that did not happen. So again, this mutilation experiment also highlighted that the Lamarckian idea of acquirance of inheritance of acquired characteristics does not hold true in every case. Similarly, boring of ears and nose is a very common phenomena in different parts of the world for both boys and girls. But we do not see the next generation being born with bored ears. No. Right. So all of this challenged the Lamarckian idea, and therefore there came scope for a newer theory. Right. So in these type of questions, you will start with a basic introduction of what theory is about. Then you will highlight the postulates and then the criticism. Right. Okay. So eventually what happened, there were a certain group of scholars, evolutionists, who were called as Neo-Lamarckists, who were Lamarckian by the perspective, and they wanted to showcase to the world that Lamarck's theory of evolution was not so useless at all. So therefore, they started doing certain improvisations in the existing theory of Lamarckian idea to show that Lamarckian idea cannot be buffed entirely. Those group of scholars are called as Neo-Lamarckists, right? So we have Herbert Spencer, Ernst Haeckel, Hayat, and Copy. They did different series of experiments to highlight that there can be certain cases, certain instances where there is actual inheritance of acquired characteristics, right? So you can use these examples to highlight that how did Lamarckian supporters argue. This particular question is incomplete without drawing a flowchart, where we are trying to explain through this flowchart that how Lamarckism as a theory is growing. So there is an internal urge within the organism, along with environmental changes, will lead to creation of new needs. There will either be new organs and they'll be used properly, or there is going to be disuse of organs. If they are used, the structures develop better, and then there is inheritance of acquired characters. But if they are disused, the structures will disappear, and then that character will be acquired, and eventually, over a period of time, culmination of such acquired characteristics is what is going to lead to origin of new species, right? The second question is on microevolution. Generally, there are two factors which we talk about when we are trying to explain how evolution happens. One point of view is microevolution and the other is macroevolution. Macroevolution, as the name says, is some humongous evolutionary visible changes which are happening around us, which can help us to put together the idea of macroevolution. And we can pinpointedly say that yes, evolution is happening and is happening at such a scale. So whereas microevolution is not so perceptible at the outset because it is happening at a very small level. So these are generally small scale changes occurring in a population over a short period of time. And there can be a multitude of factors which are responsible to bring out microevolution. For example, natural selection, genetic drift, mutation, gene flow are certain examples where we see that microevolution is happening in a very small period of time, right? So small changes getting accumulated. Now, if I tell you that, okay, in a species over a period of time, multiple small changes will start coagulating together, coming together, and then lead to macroevolution over a larger period of time. Generally, macroevolution is favored by certain set of mutations because a mutation is a sudden inheritable change, right, in the genetic sequences, which eventually changes the way an organism looks. So macro changes generally are driven through mutations, and micro changes are happening all around us all the time through factors like natural selection, gene flow, genetic drift, right? That is the large difference between them. Now, if you look at the factors which bring microevolution, so like we were discussing, mutation in certain degrees. So you know that mutation can be on a large scale basis also and on a very small scale basis also. When a mutation is happening, there is going to be a change in the phenotype, because any change in genotype of an organism will lead to a change in the phenotype. For example, in the hilly areas or populations in northeastern part of the country, we have a layer over the eye, over the upper eyelid, which is called as the epicanthic fold, whose purpose originally was to protect the eyes from the direct incidence of sun rays or sunlight. So that is an adaptation which is seen in Eskimos, Peruvians, Nepalis, and African populations. Second factor is natural selection. Natural selection says that nature is going to favor selection of certain traits for an organism, which will make sure that the organism thrives better in a given state of affairs. So it can either be in stabilizing direction, okay, directional selection, or disruptive selection. The third factor which is responsible is molecular genetics, okay, where mutations in vital areas of genes are getting tolerated. For example, a mutation in hemoglobin gene is manifested in the form of sickle cell anemia, right? So sickle cell anemia for the Indian population per se is considered to be a disease, but for the African population, it is a blessing in disguise because it is protecting the population from incidence of malaria, right? The other factor is gene flow, okay, where there is interbreeding between two sets of populations and therefore flow of genetic information. And then we have genetic drift, where there is change in allelic frequencies due to some kind of an event. Genetic drift is of two types, the founder's effect and the bottleneck effect. You can use all these examples to explain that how microevolution can happen around us in day-to-day lives, right? So you can look at examples of microevolution: loss of wisdom teeth in humans, decreasing age of menarche, increase in height, blunt canines, right? So these are all examples of microevolution. Now the third question is on Neo-Darwinism. So as we were discussing initially, that there was Lamarckism, then there was Darwin's idea, and eventually there were some issues with each of the evolutionary theories that were given. Therefore, a group of scientists came together to explain that how actually evolution operates with the synthesis of phenomena which were not discovered back in the day, like gene flow, mutation, genetic drift, etc. And therefore, a group of scientists with a Darwinian perspective came together to modify Darwin's evolutionary idea, and therefore they gave a theory called Neo-Darwinism. The scholars were Ronald Fisher, J.V.S. Haldane, Dobbs Hansky, Ernst Mayr, and Huxley. So what does Neo-Darwinism say? That evolution is a change in total genetic makeup of a population, and it can be explained by a mixture of population genetics and Darwinism together. So they are recognizing that there can be more causes of variation in a particular population. What can be the causes of variation? At the gene level, there can be mutation, there can be recombination. And mutation can be of multiple types, deletion of genes, addition, translocation, transversion, inversion, etc. On the other hand, we have natural selection. So a while ago, we were discussing it is a stabilizing type, directional type, disruptive type, and relaxed type. So all of this together helped in better explanation of evolution, right? So that is why Neo-Darwinism is considered to be a more acceptable idea. Now, what is the significance of Neo-Darwinism? Because of this, we were able to formulate different kind of mathematical models. We were able to explain adaptive radiation. We were able to predict evolutionary trends, that how evolution is going to happen in times to come. And it also explains the reasons behind microevolution. But there was a group of scholars who criticized the explanation of Neo-Darwinism, citing that it does not give any insights on how cultural evolution happened. So that was entirely missed by them, because there was overemphasis on natural selection. And then ideas like bacterial flagella cannot be explained using this idea. So there were certain critics who pointed out that even Neo-Darwinian concept is not enough to completely explain evolution across the domains. So thank you, everyone.